The chamber smelled like something between burnt copper and cold stone, and I hated it the moment I walked in. I was 31 years old. I had been awake for 22 hours. I was carrying a data tablet loaded with 17 months of engineering reports, propulsion studies, and hull stress analysis, and I was about to present them to a room full of alien diplomats who had already decided that it before I opened my mouth that nothing I said would matter. My name is Owen Grant. I was a junior diplomatic attaché to Ambassador Claire Sutton, and that morning I thought the hardest part of my job would be the presentation. I was wrong. The Galactic Conclave's military review chamber on Velsoran Prime was shaped like a half-moon, with the delegates seated in a rising arc and the presenter's platform down at the center. Like the bottom of a bowl, every seat was filled. The Vreth delegation sat to the left in their pale robes, their flat gray faces utterly still. The Keth and Nara were clustered near the back, their forearms folded in what I had been told was a posture of polite indifference. The Dorval occupied the entire right side, and they were big, not just tall, but wide, dense-looking, built like something that had evolved specifically to carry armor. Ambassador Sutton stood beside me at the presenter's platform. She was 53 years old, had white hair cut short, and wore a simple dark suit. She looked like she was waiting for a bus. I did not understand how she was so calm. "You may begin," said the presiding delegate, a Vreth admiral named Sorven. His translator rendered his voice as something flat and slightly too even, like a voice playing back from a recording. I began. I walked them through the U.S. Resolute, Earth's first purpose-built deep space warship, submitted for conclave review. I explained the hybrid plasma core, the three-layer ablative hull plating, the modular weapon bays, the redundant manual override systems that allowed any station aboard the ship to take over critical functions if the main bridge was compromised. I was proud of that last part. It had taken the engineers at Area 7 4 years to design. The laughter started quietly. It was not immediate. It started as a low sound from somewhere in the Keth section, a kind of whistling exhale that their translator rendered as a dry chuckle. Then the Vreth delegates began exchanging looks, short glances, the kind of glances people share when someone tells a joke they weren't expecting in a formal setting. I kept going. I explained the railgun battery configuration. I showed the whole cross-section diagrams. I pulled up the stress test data from the firing exercises in lunar orbit. By the time I reached the redundant manual override section, 3 Vreth delegates were not even looking at the screen. One of them was leaning over to another and speaking quietly, and their translator was switched off. I could only see their expressions. They looked the way people look when they are trying not to smile at something they find genuinely funny. Admiral Sorven raised one hand. I stopped. "Attaché Grant," he said, "though it uses combustion-derived plasma cores, hybrid cores." "Yes," I said. "Combustion plasma hybrid with a secondary antimatter reserve for and the whole," he said. "This 3-layer plating, you are using ablative material physical mass as your primary defense layer, combined with an energy absorption membrane." "Yes, the combination gives us, it is very thick," he said. A few more people laughed. Not all of them tried to hide it. I looked at Ambassador Sutton. She gave me a tiny nod that meant keep going. I kept going. I got through the rest of the presentation in about 12 minutes. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, and then Admiral Sorvin spoke again. The conclave appreciates Earth's enthusiasm, he said. It takes great effort to construct a vessel of this size, even if the approach is foundational. He paused. We have reviewed similar designs from emerging species before. The redundant systems are understandable, given limited experience with high-stress deep space environments. Hull plating is, of course, heavy. Another pause, very heavy, more laughter, open this time, not whistling or sideways, real laughter. I stood there and held very still. Then Sorvan delivered the line. He did not lean forward or raise his voice, said it the way someone says something they have already said many times in many rooms, and it has always landed the same way. What you have brought us today, Attaché Grant, is a salvage barge wearing armor. The chamber erupted. I mean that. Literally, the sound came from every direction at once. The Kethanara whistling, the Dorval making a deep, repetitive rumble that their translators rendered as amused contempt. The Vreth delegates finally allowing themselves full laughter, open and unhidden. Some of them were talking to each other. Some of them were pointing at the hull cross-section still displayed on the screen behind me. I kept my face blank. I was very good at that by then. I had grown up with 2 older brothers, and I had learned early that the most dangerous thing you can do when someone wants a reaction from you is give them one. But I memorized everything. I memorized Sorvan's exact phrasing. I memorized the 11 Vreth delegates laughing openly. I memorized the Dorval section chief who did not laugh, who just watched with slow calculating eyes like he was adding numbers. I memorized the sound the room made, every pitch and register of it. Ambassador Sutton stepped forward beside me. The laughter slowly died. We appreciate the detailed feedback, she said. Her voice was completely level. The Conclave's experience with warship development far exceeds our own, and we take these observations seriously. Sorvan inclined his head slightly. Of course, Earth is young. These things take time. They do, she agreed. She smiled. It was a small smile, almost warm. I did not understand that smile. For another 3 years, we were escorted out through a side corridor and into the transit hub. I walked beside Ambassador Sutton in silence for about 2 minutes. The corridor was long and white and smelled like recycled air. A diplomatic escort from the Conclave staff walked ahead of us. Ambassador, I finally said. Not yet, she said quietly. We walked further. The escort reached a junction, paused to key in a route, and moved ahead again. Ambassador Owen, she said my name the way a teacher says it, calm with just enough weight behind it to make you stop talking. What did you notice in there? Not what was said. What did you notice? I thought about it. The Dorval section chief, I said. He did not laugh. She glanced at me sideways. What else? Sorvan turned off his translator when he spoke to his delegates. During my presentation, he did not want us to hear whatever he was saying. Yes, she said, and they reviewed our specs thoroughly enough to pull specific details, the plasma core type, the hull material classification. That level of detail means they studied the documents we submitted in advance. They came prepared to criticize. She was quiet for a moment, which means they took us seriously enough to prepare, I said slowly. They just Didn't want us to know that, Ambassador. Sutton nodded once, then she said, "Nothing else for the rest of the walk." That night I sat alone in my assigned quarters on the Conclave station and read through every piece of recorded testimony from that chamber I could pull from the public archives. Emerging species reviewed over the last 4 centuries, species that had submitted warship, species that had been laughed at. I found 6 cases. 3 of those species were now full Conclave members with recognized military fleets. 2 had abandoned their programs and integrated peacefully into Conclave trade systems. 1 no longer existed. I sat with that for a while, then I opened a new file on my tablet, titled it simply, "I Remembered from the Chamber." Every face, word, every moment of laughter, and exactly when it had started and when it had stopped. I wrote for 2 hours. When I was done, I read it back once, then encrypted it and saved it to a private drive that I kept with me from that night forward. I told myself it was just documentation, professional habit, the kind of record-keeping a good attaché was supposed to maintain, but that was not entirely true. The truth was simpler. The truth was that I had just watched a room full of powerful beings mock the people I came from, and I wanted a record of it, not because I was angry, though I was quietly in the place where I kept things I did not show, but because I had a strong, bone-deep feeling that someday in some room the record would matter. I did not know what room. I did not know when. I just knew the feeling, and I trusted it. I shut off the light and lay back on the narrow station bunk, and I listened to the hum of the station's ventilation system, and I thought about thick hull plating and why we had built it the way we had, and what it might look like the next time anyone in that chamber saw it. The answer, I suspected, was going to be very different from what they expected. I smiled in the dark just once, and then I went to sleep. The reassignment order came on a Tuesday, 16 days after we returned from Velson Prime. It was brief, marked with a clearance level I had never seen attached to a posting before, and it told me to report to Shipyard Area 7 in Jupiter orbit within 72 hours. It said nothing about what I would be doing there. It said nothing about who I would be reporting to. It said only that I had been selected for embedded intelligence liaison duty with the Terran Fleet Engineering Corps, and that I should bring no personal communications equipment. I packed in 40 minutes and left for the transit hub. The journey to Jupiter orbit took 9 days. On a standard transport, I spent most of it reading everything publicly available about the Terran Fleet's engineering development history, which was not very much because most of it was classified. What I could access was a series of congressional appropriations records, some dry procurement documents, and a few press releases about new manufacturing partnerships with private aerospace contractors. None of it told me anything specific. All of it suggested that a very large amount of money had been moving very quietly for the past 3 years. Ares 7 was not what I expected. I had been to shipyards before, commercial docks, repair facilities, the standard gray and white industrial structures that orbited Earth at various altitudes. They were utilitarian, functional, the kind of places that smelled like coolant and echoed with the sound of work. Ares 7 was different in a way. I felt before I could name it. The transport brought me through the main approach corridor and into the docking bay, and As I looked through the viewport, I saw the scale of it, not just the structure of the yard itself, but the number of docking arms, the activity, the sheer constant movement of components and equipment and personnel. It was enormous. It had been expanded recently and significantly, and someone had done a great deal of work to make sure that expansion was not visible from any external sensor array. A woman named Lieutenant Commander Alice Morey met me at the dock. She was my height, mid-40s, with sharp eyes and the specific kind of efficient posture that people develop after years of moving through tight spaces quickly. She did not smile when she introduced herself. She handed me a clearance badge, a station map, and a single sheet of paper with my first day's schedule printed on it. No tablets, she said, no personal devices in the primary bays. We have dedicated terminals for documentation. You will be shown how to use them. What am I actually here to do? I asked. Observe, document, and maintain intelligence logs on project development status. You will be present during key design reviews and integration tests. She glanced at me. You were at Vel Sarin? Yes. Good, she said. Then you know what we are working toward. She walked ahead. I followed. Primary Bay was where I saw it for the first time. The U.S. Resolute was in the first docking cradle, and she was being taken apart, not destroyed, dismantled. With purpose, with the careful, deliberate energy of a surgeon, not a demolition crew. Teams of engineers moved across her hull on magnetic tread platforms. The forward section had already been opened, and I could see the original plasma core housing exposed, the old casing removed and set aside in labeled containers. The hull plating on the port side had been stripped back to the secondary layer, and what was left gleamed under the work lights with a raw, honest look like bone. I stood at the observation window for a long time. Then I went in. I want to be clear about what the next 18 months inside Ares 7 actually looked like, because I think the outside world imagined something dramatic, some grand moment of transformation, some single breakthrough that changed everything. It was not like that at all. It was like watching a very large, very complicated argument slowly resolve itself into something that worked. The lead engineer on the Resolute project was a man named Dr. Philip Carr. He was 55, heavy-set with reading glasses. He wore po-po pushed up on his forehead, even when he was not reading. He had a specific verbal habit of starting every explanation with "the thing is," as if every problem had one central truth that needed locating before anything else could happen. He had worked on Earth's deep space propulsion program for over 20 years, and he had been at Ares 7 for the last 4. The thing was, he told me, on my second day, they had not started with a plan to build a warship. They had started with a question. The Conclave ships are faster than ours, he said. We were standing at a long work table covered in hull material samples. Their energy systems are more efficient. Their shielding technology is more advanced. If you compare them to ours on any single metric, they win. He picked up a sample of the ablative plating from the original Resolute design, a dense dark gray slab about the size of a book. But when we started looking at the combat data from border incidents, actual recorded engagements, salvage debris, energy signatures, we found something interesting. He set the plating down and tapped it. There, Shields fail in patterns, he said. Consistent patterns, under sustained kinetic bombardment at specific frequencies, energy shielding loses coherence, the fancy tech breaks down. And when it does, he picked up a second sample thinner with a different surface texture. There is nothing behind it because they stopped building physical hull protection centuries ago. I looked at the two samples side by side. So our primitive plating, I said, is actually a structural advantage in a sustained engagement, he said. They thought it meant we did not understand energy shielding. What it means is we understand that energy runs out. He pushed his glasses up further. On his forehead, steel does not apologize. That phrase stayed with me. The rebuild of the Resolute took 14 months. I will not catalog every change. There were hundreds, but I will tell you what the ship became because I was there for all of it, and I want you to understand what it looked like when it was finished. The plasma cores were pulled and replaced with a hybrid drive system that Dr. Carr's team had spent 3 years developing, an antimatter primary drive paired with the original plasma cores running in secondary mode. Antimatter gave them the speed they needed to operate at conclave engagement ranges. The plasma backup gave them something the conclave's pure antimatter ships did not have, a completely redundant drive system that could keep the ship moving even if the primary was destroyed. It also made the ship's energy signature look at long range almost identical to the old Resolute. The new drive was hidden inside the same housing as the old one. The hull was completely restructured. The original 3-layer ablative plating was kept, but redesigned using a new composite material that Dr. Carr's team had developed after 18 months of testing. Conclave alloy samples salvaged from debris. The new plating was 30% thinner and twice as dense. It did not look different from the outside. It was very different under fire. The weapon configuration was the part that took longest because the arguments were the most complicated. The original Resolute had carried a modest set of railgun batteries and a standard missile complement. What the engineering team wanted to install and what the military advisors kept pushing back on was a reconfigurable modular system weapon base that could be physically rebuilt between engagements to carry different armament loads depending on mission requirements. The argument was that it was too complex, that moving parts were weak points, that a fixed configuration was more reliable. Dr. Carr won the argument by building a prototype of the modular bay and then having the crew physically destroy it and rebuild it 22 times in a row under timed conditions until they could do it in under 4 hours. Moving parts are only weak points if the people operating them are not trained, he told the review board. They approved it. The redundant manual override system, the feature that Sorvon had dismissed during my presentation, was not only kept but expanded. By the time the rebuild was complete, any of 16 separate stations aboard the ship could assume full command and control if every other station was non-functional. This included an isolated engineering bay buried deep in the ship's secondary hull, behind 4M of the new composite plating, that could operate every core ship system independently for up to 72 hours. I was there the first time they ran the full test, all stations isolated, command physically cut to the bridge, everything routed through the deep engineering bay. The ship systems held every function nominal, Lieutenant. Commander Morey stood beside me watching. The status board, they thought it was a design flaw, I said. They were thinking about their ship, she said. Not ours. Two things happened in the 16th month that accelerated the final stage of the project. The first was a breakthrough in sensor integration. Young engineer named Neil Ford. He was 27, quiet. The kind of person who said very little in meetings and then sent you a document afterward that made you realize he had understood the problem better than anyone else in the room, developed a passive sensor array that could be embedded in the hull composite without any external signature. The ship could now gather full combat-grade sensor data while broadcasting nothing, running dark, looking to any external scan, exactly like a vessel that had turned off its active sensors, which to any conclave observer meant it was not paying attention. The second thing was not a breakthrough, it was news. A Dorval patrol in the outer buffer zone stopped 2 Earth colony transports and demanded inspection under a provision of conclave border law that had never been applied to civilian vessels. 1 transport complied, the second did not comply fast enough. The delay was 11 minutes, caused by a communication lag that anyone familiar with the region's relay network would have recognized immediately as routine. The Dorval patrol destroyed it, 214 people. I learned about it in the documentation bay on a Tuesday morning. I sat at my terminal for a few minutes and did not type anything. Then I went and found Dr. Carr in the primary bay where he was reviewing the final weapon integration schematics. He saw my face. I know, he said. I just got the same message. We stood there together for a moment in the noise of the working shipyard, not saying anything. Then he set down his tablet, pulled his glasses off his forehead, and put them in his pocket. We are 6 weeks from ready, he said. 6 weeks, I said. He nodded. We can do it in 4 if we run double shifts. I looked at the Resolute in the docking cradle. She looked different now, still recognizable in her general shape, but subtly, decisively different in a dozen details that a trained eye would catch and then untrained one would miss entirely. She sat in her cradle like something patient and quiet that had been waiting for a while and had run out of things to wait. For 4 weeks, I said. 4 weeks. He agreed. He went back to his schematics. I went back to my terminal and began updating my intelligence log. I wrote for 3 hours without stopping, documenting every system modification, every test result, every performance metric I had witnessed since the day arrived. When I was done, I opened the old encrypted file I had started on the night after Vel Sorn, the one called Vel Sorn Notes. I read it straight through for the first time in 18 months. Then I added a single line at the end. We are ready. The deployment orders came 9 days later. I was assigned as intelligence liaison aboard the Resolute herself, which I had not expected. Lieutenant Commander Morey told me it made sense. I had the most complete knowledge of the ship's new capabilities of anyone outside the core engineering team, and I had operational context that the fleet officers lacked. I would not be in command of anything. I would observe, document, and advise. I packed my bag that night and lay in my bunk and listened to the sound of the shipyard. In the morning, for the first time, I walked across the docking bridge and stepped aboard the U.S. Resolute. She was very quiet inside, clean Purposeful, every corridor had the efficient feel of something designed by people who had thought hard about every centimeter. I walked to my assigned station in the intelligence bay, a compact room 1 level below the main bridge with 4 terminals and a direct feed to every sensor system on the ship. I sat down. The ship hummed around me. Alive and awake and ready, I thought about the chamber at Velsorn Prime and the sound of laughter and the slow, careful eyes of the Dorval section chief, who had not laughed. Then I pulled up my console and went to work. The Dorval buffer zone began at a line of navigational buoys strung in a loose arc across the outer edge of the Kethanara transit corridor, and from a distance it looked peaceful. I had been watching it on passive sensors for 6 hours by the time we reached it, and the word that kept coming to mind was patient. The buffer zone sat there the way a large animal sits, not asleep, not hostile, just waiting to see what moved toward it. We moved toward it at a steady, unhurried speed. There were 5 of us, the Resolute and 4 escort ships, all running under a diplomatic passage authorization that Ambassador Sutton had filed with the Conclave Secretariat 48 hours earlier. It was a legitimate filing, completely standard, the kind of authorization that had been granted to Earth transit vessels dozens of times before. The authorization did not describe the Resolute in detail. It used the vessel's registration number, which had not changed, and its official classification, which had been listed as patrol-class warship since the original commissioning. Captain Helen Drake stood at the main bridge. She was 46 tall and had the specific kind of stillness that I had come to associate with very experienced people who had decided long ago that showing anxiety was a waste of time. She had been in deep space service for 18 years and had commanded 2 previous vessels, both of which had been in active engagements near the Dorval border. She had not been laughing in the chamber on Velsorn. She had not been there, but I had the sense that she was familiar with what had happened, the way someone can be familiar with a story they were not present for, through the mood it left in the rooms it traveled through. Buffer beacon at 40,000 km, said the navigation officer, a young man named Owen Pierce, who had the habit of reporting position data in a voice slightly too level, as if forcing calm was the same as having it. Acknowledged, said Captain Drake. We crossed the beacon line at 8:47 station time. Nothing happened for 12 minutes. Then the communication board chimed and a Dorval patrol vector opened on the tactical display. 2 ships running an intercept course from the inner buffer zone. Standard procedure. They would close to 500 km, identify us, log the diplomatic clearance, and either wave us through or ask for additional verification. The communications officer, a woman named Ruth Ellis, looked at her board. Patrol approaching. They are broadcasting standard identification request. Send them our registration and authorization code, said Captain Drake. Nothing else? Yes, Captain. I watched the patrol vector on my screen. They were coming in at standard intercept speed, no urgency. This was routine to them. A human vessel in the buffer zone was not exciting. Human vessels had been passing through on diplomatic clearance for years. The Resolute's name meant nothing to them because they had never encountered it. Outside of a tribunal they had clearly not taken seriously. I thought about that, about the advantage of being dismissed, about how much space it gives you. The patrol reached 2,000 km and Slowed, I watched the sensor return. They were generating. I could see their active scan sweeping across us. It was a standard identification scan, the kind designed to verify whole markings and cross-check registration databases. It was not a combat scan. They had not activated targeting systems. They were doing paperwork. Then the scan completed, and nothing happened for 11 seconds. I know it was 11 seconds because I was watching the time stamp on my sensor feed, and I counted each one. On the 12th second, the Dorval Patrol Commander opened a direct channel. Vessel transmitting as U.S. Resolute, said the voice through the translator. Please confirm vessel class and armament. Configuration. Ruth Ellis looked at Captain Drake. Captain Drake did not look at me, but she said quietly, Owen. I understood. She wanted my assessment. I pulled up the sensor return data, what the Dorval scan had received, and compared it to their known vessel classification database entries. Their scan had matched our hull outline and come back with an unknown classification, not unregistered. Unknown. The Resolute's hull profile had changed enough that their automated system could not place it in a known category. The mass readings were off. From their records, the energy signature was different. The weapon hardpoint count visible to any scan thorough enough to look was different. I typed a brief note and sent it to Captain Drake's secondary screen. They do not recognize the configuration. Their system returned no match. They are asking manually. She read it, nodded once, and looked at Ruth. Respond with our full vessel classification documentation, everything on file. Ruth sent the documents. Another pause. Shorter this time, 7 seconds. West Resolute, said the Dorval commander. Again, and this time the translator was conveying something different in the cadence, not aggression, not alarm. Something more careful. Your current sensor profile does not match our records for this vessel. Please explain the discrepancy. We have undergone standard systems upgrades, Captain Drake said. All modifications are registered with the Terran Fleet Registry and the Conclave Secretariat. You are welcome to verify. A longer pause. I watched the patrol ships on the tactical display. They had stopped their approach. They were sitting at 2,000 km, and I could see that their active scan was still running, still sweeping us, probing deeper now, running the kind of analysis that takes time. I watched what the scan found. It found the railgun batteries, all 12 of them, in their new configuration. It found the reconfigured missile bays currently loaded and locked in deep strike configuration. It found the secondary hull armor density, which would register as significantly higher than the Conclave baseline for a vessel this size. It found the sensor array integration in the hull, though it could not identify what it was doing, only that it was there and very dense. It found a ship that did not match anything in their system. A third Dorval ship appeared on the tactical display, then a fourth coming from a station bearing further into the buffer zone. They were not running combat intercept courses, but they were moving. Captain, said Owen Pierce from navigation, 3 additional Dorval contacts, 2 from station bearing 170, 1 from 245. I see them, said Captain Drake. She turned to the weapons officer, a quiet, careful man named George Banks. George, status, system nominal, weapons in standby, targeting solutions updated and holding. How many ships can we generate targeting? Solutions 4. George looked at his board. Current configuration 14. Simultaneous, optimal engagement reign. Maintained against all 6 contacts. Captain Drake nodded. The communications board chimed again. This time it was not the patrol commander. This time it was a Dorval fleet designation, a rank higher than anything we had seen from the patrol, equivalent to what the Conclave would call a sector commander. Human. Vessel Resolute, said the voice. It was steadier than the patrol commanders. More practiced, but the translator caught something underneath it, a quality of stillness that I recognized. It was the same stillness of someone doing arithmetic and finding the answer. Wrong. You are currently carrying armament in excess of your registered patrol class. Designation, please stand by for additional inspection. Captain Drake looked at me. I typed quickly. They want to board. Standard. Intimidation move. If they board, they see everything. She read it, then she keyed her own communication channel and spoke in a clear, measured voice. Dorval. Sector Command, this vessel is operating under full Conclave diplomatic passage. Authorization. All systems and armament are within the parameters of our registered classification, which has been updated with the Conclave Secretariat. If you have questions regarding our authorization, you are welcome to contact the Conclave Secretariat directly. A pause, and then we are of course happy to wait while you do. Silence. I watched the tactical display. The 4 additional Dorval ships had stopped moving. The 2 patrol ships were still sitting at 2,000 km. I pulled up a passive monitoring feed and routed it through my own console. Watching the energy signatures of the Dorval vessels, their combat systems were online. I could see the power draws, the subtle shifts in signature that indicated active targeting. They were looking at us the way you look at something you are not sure about. George Banks spoke quietly. Captain, our targeting solutions are live and broadcasting. I looked at him. He had not made a mistake. He had broadcast the targeting solutions, not on a door channel, but on the open Conclave monitoring frequency, the frequency that every vessel in range was required to monitor, the frequency that recorded all military activity in the zone. Captain Drake said nothing, but something in her expression shifted in a way I would have missed if I had not been watching for it. George had not been told to do that. He had done it because he was good at his job, and he understood the conversation we were having. Every ship in range now knew that the Resolute had 14 live, updated targeting solutions. They knew what was in those solutions because the targeting data on an open frequency was detailed enough to read. 3 minutes passed. The Dorval sector commander came back on the channel. Your authorization has been verified. He said you may proceed. That was all. No further questions, no inspection. Request the 4 additional ships return to their prior headings. The 2 patrol ships moved off our intercept course. The buffer zone opened in front of us like a door being politely held. Captain Drake nodded once at navigation. Continue on course. The ship moved forward. I sat at my console and wrote 3 sentences in my intelligence log. Dorval Patrol requested inspection. Inspection was declined. Dorval Patrol withdrew. Then I sat back and thought about 11 seconds of silence and what it meant when an empire did arithmetic and did not like the Answer: we completed the transit without further incident. I wrote 40 pages of documentation over the following 2 days. On the evening of the second day, I was in the ship's small common room getting coffee when Ruth Ellis came in and sat down across from me, intercepted of Wrath intelligence signal on the way back through the corridor relay. She said she slid a decoded transcript across the table. I read it. It was short 9 words sent from a Wrath Fleet intelligence station to a Wrath diplomatic post. Verify, recheck. How did we miss this? I read it twice. Then I folded the paper and put it in my pocket next to the clearance badge I still carried from Ares 7. I drank my coffee. I thought about 17 months inside a shipyard and a man who wore his reading glasses on his forehead, and a young engineer named Neil Ford who never said much in meetings, and hull plating that was thick for a reason. I thought about 214 people on a colony transport. I thought about what came next. Thank you, Ruth, I said. She nodded and left me to my coffee outside the viewport. The stars moved past in their slow, indifferent way, the same as they always had, the same as they always would. The ship moved through them steadily, purposefully, carrying its weight and its weapons and its very particular kind of patience. I finished my coffee and went back to work. The message from the Conclave Secretariat arrived on a Thursday at 600, and by 800 I was on a fast transit shuttle to Velsarin Prime, sitting across from Ambassador Claire Sutton for the first time in almost 2 years. She looked the same: white hair, dark suit, the same quality of stillness that I had once mistaken for calm and now understood was something different. Not the absence of feeling, but the complete mastery of when and where to show it. The shuttle was small and the cabin was private, and she poured 2 cups of coffee from a flask she had brought and handed me one without asking if I wanted it. They filed a formal complaint, she said. The Dorval. No, I read it. They are calling it unauthorized military escalation. They claim we entered the buffer zone with an undeclared warship and deliberately presented targeting solutions to their patrol in a threatening manner. George Banks broadcast those targeting solutions on an open monitoring frequency, I said, which is not only permitted under Conclave operating regulations, but is actually required during any close contact military encounter in a monitored zone. Yes, she said. So the complaint is performance, she said. They are angry and embarrassed, and they need to be seen doing something. She drank her coffee. The session has been called for 1400. Tomorrow, all Conclave members present. Full chamber, the same chamber, I said. She looked at me over her cup. The same chamber. I thought about the half-moon shape of it, the rising arc of seats, the presenter's platform at the bottom like the floor of a bowl. I thought about Sorvin's voice saying, salvage barge wearing armor, and the sound the room had made, and the shape of my own face as I had held it still. What do you need from me? I said. Everything in your intelligence log. From Velsarin to now, she said. Organized chronologically, and the sensor data from the buffer zone. Encounter, all of it. You have it already, I said. I filed it to your office last week. I know, she said. I wanted to hear you say it was complete. It is complete, she nodded, and looked out the small viewport at the passing stars. Owen in the chamber. Tomorrow, when I present the data, I need you to watch the Vreth delegation Sorvin, I said, all of them, but... Yes, Sorvin especially, she paused. I want to know what he looks like when he understands. I thought about that, about the specific face someone makes when the world rearranged itself inside their head, and there is no version of it they like. I will watch, I said. The conclave chamber was full, every seat occupied, every delegation present. The air had the specific weight of a room where everyone has come to watch something and nobody is sure exactly what it is going to be. The Dorval section occupied their usual right side arc. Admiral Sorvin presided from the center of the raised breath section, his flat gray face arranged in the expression I now recognized as his neutral setting. Attentive, slightly elevated, the expression of a person accustomed to the highest seat in any room. Ambassador Sutton and I entered from the left corridor. She walked to the presenters' platform. I took a seat at the delegation desk to the right of it. Slightly behind her, I was not the one presenting today. I was the one watching. The Dorval delegate, a broad, dense figure named Section Commander Vrel, opened the session by restating the complaint in full. He spoke for 14 minutes. The translation was smooth and even, but underneath it I could hear the rhythm of his actual speech, clipped, forceful, the cadence of someone making an official record rather than a genuine argument. He cited 3 specific violations of buffer zone protocol, referenced the open broadcast of targeting solutions as an act of provocation, and concluded by calling for formal sanctions against Earth's military program. Then Ambassador Sutton stood. She placed a single data chip on the podium. With the chamber's permission, she said, I would like to begin with a brief historical record. Sorvin gave a small nod. She played the footage from the original tribunal. It had been recorded by the station's standard documentation system, the same system that recorded every formal conclave session. The footage was clear, high resolution, the kind of recording that was created to be archival, permanent and exact. The chamber watched itself. I watched Sorvin's face. For the first 30 seconds he was still. The kind of still that is not calm, the kind that is controlled. He watched the screen as the footage showed his own delegation laughing. He watched himself lean forward and deliver the line about the salvage barge. He watched the Dorval section chief making his deep amused rumble. He watched the Kethanara delegates whistling. He watched the chamber erupt. His face did not change, but something in his eyes did, a quality of adjustment, the way a very disciplined person absorbs a development they did not anticipate and files it away into the part of the mind that handles serious things. Around the chamber the mood had shifted. The Kethanara were very still. A few of the smaller delegation species I recognized but could not name species from the outer ring of conclave membership were exchanging looks that were not amused. They were the looks of people watching something they recognized, the looks of people who had at some point also been laughed at. Ambassador Sutton stopped the footage. That was 17 months ago, she said. Conclave reviewed our vessel and found it lacking. We took that feedback seriously. She played the second file. The second file was the Resolute's complete technical specification as of her current configuration, not the original specs from the tribunal, the real ones, the ones that had been verified and documented through the ARI 7 rebuild program and every subsequent test. Hull density analysis, drive. System output, weapon hardpoint count. With individual system capabilities. Sensor array integration data, targeting. System performance metrics, shield. Alternative ablative rating under. Sustained kinetic fire at every frequency. The Conclave's own weapons. Used beside each metric. The file showed a direct comparison to the nearest equivalent Conclave vessel. The chamber was very quiet. I watched Sorvan read the numbers. There is a face people make when they are adding something up. And the answer is not what they expected. It is not dramatic. It does not involve wide eyes or open mouths or any of the things that actors use to show surprise. It is a very small tightening around the eyes, a stillness in the jaw, a quality of focus that looks almost like the absence of expression but is in fact its densest form. Servalan made that face. I watched him make it, and I memorized it the same way I had memorized the laughter. Ambassador Sutton moved to the next section of the file, the buffer zone. Encounter data, raw sensor logs. Timestamps showing exactly what had happened from the moment we crossed the beacon line. She walked through it, calmly pointing out each step. The patrol's identification request, the Resolute's response, the additional Dorval ships that had moved to intercept, the targeting solutions. Broadcast on the open monitoring frequency, which she noted with a specific precision that I admired, was not only permitted but required under Conclave Regulation 47C, which she then quoted in full. She paused. Section. Commander Vrel's complaint alleges that this broadcast was an act of provocation, she said. The Conclave's own regulations describe it as an act of transparency. I'm not certain how to reconcile those two positions, but I look forward to the Chamber's guidance. Nobody said anything. She advanced to the final section of the file. The Conclave has expressed concern about the Resolute's armament and whether it exceeds Earth Patrol class designation, she said. This is a fair question and I want to answer it honestly. A pause. The Resolute is not our most advanced warship. The Chamber remained quiet. It is the oldest, she said. She let that sit for a moment. Earth currently operates 11 additional vessels of comparable or greater capability. All are registered with the Terran Fleet Registry. All have been developed within the framework of Conclave membership guidelines. All were developed after the tribunal session you have just watched, in response to observations and, frankly, to events that have since occurred in the buffer zone. She did not name the transport. She did not need to. Everyone in the room knew about it. We have not sought confrontation. We have prepared ourselves as any responsible member of this body should. To protect our people, she removed the data chip from the podium. We ask the Chamber to dismiss the complaint filed by the Dorval delegation, and we ask that the Conclave take a formal note of the events in the buffer zone, including the destruction of the civilian transport 8 months prior, which has not yet been addressed by this body. She stepped back from the podium. She did not say anything else. I watched Sorvan for another 30 seconds. He was looking at the screen, which was now blank. The numbers were gone, but I could see them in his expression, the way you can see a light that has just been switched off in the shape of the room it was illuminating. The chamber began to stir, delegates leaning to each other, low voices, the sound of a formal session trying to remember its own procedure in the face of something it had not budgeted time for. Vrel started to rise and then sat back down and then rose again, and the presiding officer had to call for order twice. Before the room settled, the session lasted another 4 hours. There were questions, statements, procedural motions, a short recess. The Dorval delegation withdrew their formal complaint midway through the afternoon, replacing it with a request for clarification of conclave buffer zone regulations, which was essentially the same complaint. Without the teeth, the Vreth delegation offered no statements at all after the initial footage played. Sorvin did not speak once for the remainder of the session. At the end, when the chamber began to empty and the noise of footsteps and low conversations filled the half-moon space, I sat at the delegation desk and wrote the same 4 words in my notes that I had written when I first arrived at Ares 7 and understood what we were building. I wrote same room, different gravity. Then I closed my notebook and stood. Ambassador Sutton was standing near the corridor entrance, speaking with a delegate from one of the outer ring species, a smaller being, pale-colored. With careful eyes, I watched them for a moment. The delegate was speaking quietly and intently, and the ambassador was listening with real attention, not the polite listening of someone waiting to respond. I crossed the room to join her, and as I did, I passed close to the Vreth delegation's exit corridor. Sorvin was still there, speaking quietly to one of his aides. He was facing away from me. As I passed, I heard 2 words through his translator, not meant for me, not meant for anyone outside his immediate circle. Verify everything, he said. I did not slow down. I did not look at him. I kept walking across the chamber floor, past the presenters' platform where 2 weeks ago I had stood for the first time, and now stood for the second time, and felt nothing like what I had felt the first time. I reached the ambassador, and she glanced at me, and I gave a small nod, and she gave a small nod back, and we walked out together into the white corridor and toward whatever came next. Outside the station, air still smelled like burnt copper. I did not hate it this time. The Dorval non-aggression agreement was signed on the 47th day after the Velsoran session, in the most solemn chamber, with considerably less fanfare. I was not there for the signing. I was on the Resolute, 2 light-years out from Velsoran, running a routine deep space patrol. Captain Drake was in command. George Banks was at weapons. Ruth Ellis was at communications. Owen Pierce was at navigation. Neil Ford's sensor array was running quietly in the hull, gathering everything, broadcasting nothing. The news came through the relay system at 1400 and was read aloud on shipwide by the communications officer on duty. Nobody cheered, nobody made speeches. There was a general settling of atmosphere, the way air feels after a pressure change, and then people went back to their stations and their work. I was in the intelligence bay when the announcement came. I sat for a moment after it finished, my hands flat on the desk, thinking about the shape of everything, about a room full of laughter, and a woman with a thin smile in a shipyard were built where nobody was looking, and 14 months of work that smelled like metal and purpose. About 214 people. The treaty did not mention them. Treaties rarely mention the specific weights of the things they are made from. I thought about them for a while, then I opened a New log file and started writing. That was 11 years ago. I am sitting now in my study aboard the U.S. Endurance, which is the newest carrier in the Terran fleet, and the largest ship humanity has ever put into deep space. She is 3 times the size of the Resolute, carries a crew of 400, and has a weapon configuration that I am not permitted to describe in detail even in a personal memoir. She runs smooth and quiet, and she is very, very fast. Outside my viewport, if I turn at the right angle, I can see the Ares 7 yard. It has expanded twice since I was there last. The docking arms are lit up at all hours. A young woman came to see me 3 weeks ago. Her name is Mara Ellison, and she is a graduate research fellow from the Vreth Academy's new Comparative Military Studies program, a program that did not exist 11 years ago, because 11 years ago the Vreth Academy did not offer courses that took human military development seriously enough to study. She has careful eyes and a precise way of asking questions, and she sat across from me in this same study and put a recorder on the table and said, "Admiral Grant, I am studying the transition period between the original Velsarin Tribunal and the current state of Terran military capacity. My thesis centers on the Resolute rebuild program. Can I ask you directly, was it the insult that changed everything?" I sat with that for a while. It is a good question. It is the question, really, and I have thought about it long enough that I want to give it an honest answer. The insult did not create anything. I want to be very clear about that. Engineers at Ares 7 did not start working because of a comment in a chamber. Dr. Philip Carr had been working for years before I walked through the door of that shipyard. Neil Ford had already been asking the right questions. Lieutenant Commander Moore had already been running the numbers on Conclave warship doctrine and finding the patterns in it. The work was already happening. What the insult did was simpler and in its way more important. It told us we had time. When a powerful group looks at you and laughs, it means they are not afraid of you, and when they are not afraid of you, they are not watching you carefully. They are not tracking your programs and your budgets and your engineering teams. They are not modeling your development curves. They are not doing the kind of thorough, worried, ongoing analysis that powerful groups do. When they take something seriously, they gave us the greatest gift an enemy can give. They told us exactly what they thought we were, and then they looked away. You should never look away from a human who has been told they are nothing. We are particularly motivated by that. We are absolutely relentless about it, not out of bitterness, not out of anger, though both of those are present, and I will not pretend otherwise, but out of something older and quieter than either of those, out of the deep, specific need to demonstrate that the world as it was described to you is not the world as it actually is. Mara Ellison wrote something in her notebook. Then she looked up and said, "Was it worth it? The acceleration, the secrecy, the scale of it." I thought about the treaty. I thought about the fact that the buffer zone is open now, and colony transports move through it without stopping, and the relay network in that region has been rebuilt by Joint Conclave Working Group, and the communication lag that cost 214 people their lives no longer exists. Ask me something harder, I said. She smiled. Do you think they will try again? Not the Dorval specifically, any of them. I looked out the viewport at the Ares 7 Yard all lit up in the dark, the docking arms moving, the ships in progress sitting in their cradles in the different stages of becoming. Probably, I said, people tend to forget lessons that were expensive for someone else to teach, and when they do, I turned back to her. We will have been working the whole time, I said. She wrote that down. After she left, I sat for a long time in the quiet of the study. The Endurance hummed around me. The same low, purposeful hum I had first felt aboard the Resolute, the hum of something alive and awake and ready. Outside, Ares 7 glittered in the dark of Jupiter's shadow. I thought about Dr. Carr, who had retired 3 years ago and was now teaching at the engineering faculty at Bristol, where he still started every explanation with the thing is. I thought about Neil Ford, who had been given his own research division and was currently working on something he was not allowed to tell me about. I thought about Lieutenant Commander Moray, who now commanded the Ares 7 facility, who still had the efficient posture and still did not smile when she introduced herself. I thought about Ambassador Sutton, who had left the diplomatic service 2 years ago and was living quietly somewhere in New Zealand and had, as far as I knew, never given a single interview about Velsana. I thought about Owen Pierce counting positions in a voice slightly too level, about George Banks broadcasting, targeting solutions on an open frequency without being told because he was good at his job and understood the conversation, about Ruth Ellis sliding a decoded transcript across a table in a small common room. I thought about the Resolute, which was a museum ship now, docked at Ares 7 and open to the public on the first Saturday of every month. She looked small when you saw her beside the current fleet, small and thick-hulled and purposeful, with her ugly redundant systems and her deep engineering bay buried behind 4M of composite plating. She looked like exactly what she was the beginning. I looked out the viewport one more time. The Endurance moved steadily through the dark, carrying her weight and her crew and her very particular kind of patience, and the stars passed around her in their slow, indifferent way, and somewhere behind us, across the light years, in a chamber shaped like a half-moon on a station that smelled like burnt copper and cold stone, the conclave continued its business, and the outer ring species sat in their seats and watched, and the Dorval and the Vreth and the Katar held their positions and their assumptions and their carefully maintained confidence. And in the yards and the labs and the quiet classified facilities scattered across the solar system and beyond, in the places nobody was watching closely enough, the work continued. It always does. That is the thing about humans. And I say this with full awareness of what it sounds like. We do not stop, not when we are laughed at, not when we are dismissed, not when the numbers are against us, not when the room is not on our side. We find the problem, we find the pattern, we find the 11 seconds of silence, and we understand what it means. We build the thing that does not match anything in their registry, and then we wait with all the patience we have for the moment they look back.